Hi, I'm Chance.
And I'm Sarah Catherine.
And this is Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
We run a wildlife education nonprofit focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day around the country.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and wildlife management and ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
Join us each week to discover just how these dedicated people are working to protect our planet. Today, we're talking with Dr. David Eslinger. He works with NOAA as an oceanographer, and he is also a pretty prolific citizen scientist.
Thanks for being on the show with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
Really glad you're here.
Could you just tell us a little bit about what is the work that you do with NOAA?
Yeah, I actually work for a part of NOAA called the Office for Coastal Management. And our mission is to really kind of do tech transfer from the scientific world and the technological world to coastal resource managers. So we try to make the jobs of local and state managers easier by providing them with the data, tools, information they need to make better informed decisions at a local level. And specifically, I work a lot with water quality, not in evaluating it, but say looking at computer models that help people say, if I develop this area, what's going to happen to my water quality downstream from that? So estimating what's the impact of development going to be and issues like that. So I don't actually do a lot of oceanography. In fact, I haven't been to sea as an oceanographer since I became an oceanographer for NOAA, which is pretty ironic. But as people, especially students, go into a career field, they should be aware that they have to be flexible because there's a lot of cool stuff out there. You don't always know where the path will take you.
Absolutely. And oceanography is such a broad field. You can do so much in oceanography. You can do chemical oceanography, biological oceanography, physical oceanography, and each of those scientists is going to be doing something wildly different.
That's right. And you need to know a little bit about all of those.
Right.
I think that's why I like to be an oceanographer, not like a marine biologist, because I like the way systems work all together.
It's a broader scope.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what exactly brought you into this field? What was kind of your path leading up to this?
That's funny. So when I was 12 years old, I'm from Idaho. So if you've never met anyone from Idaho before, now you have.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah. An oceanographer from Idaho. When I was 12 years old in junior high, we called it back then, I was wandering through the library and I pulled a book off the shelf. It was something like a Hardy Boys book.
Okay.
But it wasn't actually the Hardy Boys. And I wish I had that book. But I was reading it, and these two boys were solving some mystery out in California. And one of their mentors was a marine biologist. And they did this stuff about diving and going abalone fishing. And it just captured my imagination. And even though I'd never seen the ocean, and I wouldn't until I was 16, I said, you know what? I'm going to be an oceanographer.
Wow.
And so I read every single book I could find in the library and studied all I could and went on to become an oceanographer. And that is, in fact, why my card says oceanographer to this day, as opposed to like physical scientist or something.
Because you fell in love with it
because,
when you were 12.
Yeah, I did. And I said, I'm going to be an oceanographer.
And you stuck with it.
I did. I stuck with it. And so if there are kids out there that are listening right now, do it. You can do it. I won't tell you it'll be easy because it will probably be hard. There was a lot of troubles along the way and I almost changed a few times. But if you really want to do something, you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a project that you're doing that's looking at the South Carolina waterways. Is it fair to say that you're leading an expedition?
Yeah, it is. And I probably need to make clear, this isn't a NOAA expedition at all. This is what I do in my spare time because I enjoy what I do for work. But right now it doesn't get me outside very much, as I mentioned. So
right.
I love to explore. And I recently was at a conference and learned about an opportunity with the National Geographic Open Explorer expeditions they have. So this program where it's designed to encourage people that you can do an expedition no matter where you are. We don't all have to be have billion-dollar budgets or tens of millions of dollars to travel to some far distant point on the compass. And I have a group of friends. We like to get together and go play in the woods, if you will, or wherever. And so when I learned about this thing, I learned that we could apply to the Sea Initiative.
And so basically anyone can do this. Like we can go and sign up through Open Explore and say, hey, we have this project we want to lead.
You can. And in fact, they are looking for other people to engage. And what the Sea opportunity gives you is they have a grant that you can get to get an ROV. So an open ROV, Trident. So it's an underwater robot that you control from the deck and drive around and take pictures. Movies, video.
That's crazy.
It is very cool. And what I want to do is explore in my own backyard, because South Carolina, and I think anywhere, has a tremendous variety of interesting biological, geological, cultural features that people can find. All you need to do is open your eyes
go
and look
outside.
Go outside in your own backyard.
It's one of those things where you can walk out anywhere, look at 1 square foot of grass, and if you sit there long enough, this whole world starts to unfold in front of you, because when you're just walking through a field of grass, you're not going to stop and focus on each individual thing. But if you sit down and you really look at what you have right in front of you, you start to see all of these connections that are basically invisible until you take the time to stop. And that's all around us. And it's a part of our everyday life that most of the time we miss because we're focused on getting to the next thing.
That's exactly right. You heard that old saying about stop and smell the roses? Well, smell them and take a look at what's living there.
And maybe
with the
take a
roses
picture
as
of them with an ROV.
That's right.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of, we are actually recording in a conference room. We have this wall of windows just looking outside. And just earlier we saw dolphins, and right now we see birds like hopping around. So it really just goes to show there is just so much outside that we can go explore.
So you're using the ROV to look at underwater environments, but that's just one part of this project, right?
Right. So what we're really trying to do is mostly photo document, just because that's easier to share. So a picture is worth 1,000 words.
That is true.
And it's very appealing. And so our plan is to use drone photography to capture aerial view.
Okay.
We've already looked a little bit at some satellite imagery to look at some of the old rice fields. So trying to look at visuals of a variety of different levels. So drone photography, surface pictures, just with a camera, a regular handheld camera.
Okay.
We've got some GoPros that we're going to be going under the water. We've got a little remote controlled vehicle that we can paddle around with kind of slowly and get up under some things. And that's where things like turtles and snakes and things like that.
All sorts of critters.
All sorts of critters. Then with the ROV, we've already seen some pretty interesting fish. And I'm particularly interested in our last expedition. We saw this beautiful aquatic vegetation that most people think, it's just a bunch of weeds,
Mud
that sticks to your thing. But when you look at it, it's really like a miniature forest underwater, and we're flying through it just like you would fly through a real forest. And so there's a whole habitat under there, 3-dimensional, that we can see with this ROV. And then at the farthest extreme, we also have access to microscopy. So as you were talking about, just sitting and looking in one spot, man, you can take a couple of drops of water and there's an entire different world down there at the protozoan level that we'll have some videos of that. And I've done a little bit of that in the past. Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's something, if you've got a fish tank and you take a drop of water out of the filter, you're going to see amazing stuff. So people can do that anywhere.
South Carolina's waterways is what you wanted to explore. And you're taking that idea and you're looking at it everywhere from one single drop of water out of the environment all the way up to satellite imagery from space to get a really holistic view of the beauty and the importance and the value of these waterways. I think that is an absolutely fascinating way to look at that idea.
Thank you. I think it should be very cool. And, I'm an oceanographer. I've been trained in a lot of different things. I am learning so much every time I go out. And so that's really what this is all about, is for us to educate ourselves and share that with other people and inspire them to go learn.
Now, you're a hobbyist photographer, too. You like to take pictures just on your spare time. Is that kind of where this idea came from?
It came from that and from the ROV. So I love to learn new things. I have to be learning And, frankly, if you're not learning, why bother? And so I do robotics in my spare time. And I did that because I started coaching my son's robotics team. But as a coach, you're not supposed to play with you're not supposed to do it. And I believe in that thoroughly. But it's like, oh, that's way too much fun.
That's really hard.
I'm going to build my own.
Yeah.
And that evolved. Now I actually do some summer camps with the South Carolina Governor's School for Science and Math and do summer camps for kids up there. And they teach them the electronics and everything they need to build. And they leave with robots that they get to take home and keep experimenting with. And that was all self-taught too. So I encourage people, you don't have to go to school to learn about something. Once you learn how to study or once you learn how to learn, just keep learning.
Yeah.
Man, it's fun.
And
it's
especially
cool.
now that there's so much technology, information is so accessible. You could not know a thing about cars and in a week watch enough YouTube videos to disassemble an engine. There's so much information out there. And some of it's not always correct, but it's always a learning experience.
It is. And I think, I would agree with that completely. It might take you a few more weeks to learn how to put that engine back together.
Well, that's
and get it to run. But don't be afraid to try. Just to make sure it's an engine you don't need.
Just not on our car, maybe. Not
or
on
a
the
car
strip.
that you really need. Yeah.
Now, if people want to find this specific project, this research that you're doing through Nat Geo and Open Explorer, how could they find it? Where would they go to find that?
So they would go and look on the Open Explorer website, which actually the way that I give that URL is I use a URL shortener. So it's bit.ly and then /SC Waters for South Carolina Waters.
Okay.
And that'll take you right there because the other one I think is like Nat Geo Open Explorer . There's some dots and stuff in there.
Right. There's so many there.
So bit.ly /SC Waters will get you right there. And please, look at it, like us, follow us. To follow, you need to make a Nat Geo account. They're free. I would encourage you to do that. And again, if there's something you want to do it. There are a variety of expeditions on there. They are by no means at all focused on ROVs.
Right.
And most of the ROV ones actually are in, I won't say way cooler, they're in way easier spots, right? So people are tracking things in the clear coral reefs, the oceans, things
Beautiful
like that.
tropical waters.
Yeah, ours is frankly quite a challenge because our waters are muddy and murky.
Right.
And so frequently we have a hard time seeing something before we bump into it.
Yeah. Now that's what I was going to say because we actually found you through the Open Explorer website. I ran across y'all and I was like, oh, cool. They're really close to us. Maybe we can interview them. But I do remember seeing one of y'all's posts that it was like, oh, today we kind of had a hard day with the ROV. We had to bring it back up or go catch it or something.
Yeah. I'm proud to say that, so we've only done 3 full expeditions. And our last one, I didn't have to get in the water to retrieve the ROV.
Congratulations.
The first time I was in, up to my shoulder. And then next time I literally had to strip down and swim out and get it. And in the swamp there was a 9-foot gator that we'd just seen out there. But fortunately, it's winter. It was cold. They're slow
in the winter.
But it was a little bit more nerve-wracking than I wanted to. But, I'm determined to make this thing work. And, I'd found an extremely complicated pile of logs and wrapped the ROV all up in it. So I had to go get it back. But if you look in there, you'll see some cool video of the coolest fish I think we saw was a bowfish, which is a really primitive kind of fish that are very sluggish and they just sit on the bottom, and there was one right out there. So worth getting wet.
Yeah.
Very much so. What has been your biggest surprise that you've seen either in the ROV or any of the other imagery that you've been working with for this project?
So it hasn't actually been a good surprise. With the ROV, it has been the number of invasive species that we're finding. That I'm actually wondering if that might turn into one of our themes. Just how much we are affecting our natural environment. And for your people listening to this, I'm giving air quotes for natural because I thought we were going to pretty pristine areas. And when I look at them, it's like, this is gorgeous. But looking in there, it's like lots of mussel shells on the beach. Most of them are from a little invasive mussel that's been introduced to the area. Wow. And there's a big thing of Phragmites reed that can be quite invasive. And I haven't yet keyed out all of the water plants that we got. I'm hoping to find some native ones in
Hopefully.
there.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that when people find something and just toss it out the window, especially aquarium plants or anything like that, it can actually have some pretty serious consequences down the road. So that was really surprising to me.
Yeah.
So
Has there been any talks of sharing this data set with researchers from other institutions who are, maybe looking specifically at invasives or using this data that you've collected in other applications?
I'm learning a little bit more about some other opportunities to do that I think we're going to try and engage in. And we're citizen science in the sense that we are citizens going out performing science. We're not doing citizen science the way that the National Weather Service has something called the COCO-RAS, which are this cooperative weather stations. And that data that is done by just average citizens who've been trained, that all goes into our daily weather forecast. So,
Right.
so that's a much more formalized citizen science kind of program, and I encourage people to get involved with that if they're
absolutely.
interested. It's very cool. But there are some other things out there now one is called iNaturalist so I just discovered that. So taking some photos and documenting what we're doing there and getting them up to the quality that they'd be required would be good. The South Carolina Aquarium has a number of citizen science apps that you can use. Yeah. And so one of them that I'm using, I don't recall exactly the name, but actually it's one app, but this one is to document litter. And that was one of my other very sad discoveries was each time we've gone out, I carry a trash bag because there's a lot of
tons of litter
out there.
Yeah.
And it astounds me at how some people, it was obvious they were sitting here by the side of the lake fishing and drinking and just throwing their cans behind them. That's like, why would you want the place that you go to fish to look like you're in the middle of a dump?
Right.
But they had. And it was clear, it was all the same can, same age, same brand. It's like one group who did it. Nobody else had done it.
Right.
Or somebody like me had gone by, picked them up. So documenting that, I think, is important because it helps, what they're using it for is to get money for cleanup and to document the impacts things are having. And it was pretty sad because almost everything I pick up is recyclable. It was aluminum cans, plastic bottles.
Right.
It's like, really? Yeah. So pick up your stuff, folks.
Yeah. Especially if you're out in the environment enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned early on at the very beginning of this podcast that there were lots of challenges kind of along the way getting to this point in your career. Do you have any specific ones that you would want to talk about that you kind of overcame these challenges or overcame these times that kind of led you to where you are now?
Well, let's see. So being a kid in Idaho, wanted to be an oceanographer. That was a tough one. Something like that is much easier now with the internet. So I read all the books that were in the public library, but as you might imagine, there wasn't an awful lot in the library on oceanography in that part of the world. But there were actually some teachers, and one of my uncles who was actually a principal was like, oh, you'll never get a job doing that. So some of the things were the attitudes of other people. So if somebody tells you can't do something, you don't necessarily need to believe that. I mean, don't believe it, just try.
Right.
And then, now I've had to adapt my oceanographic skills to the job that I have had. But a lot of times it's being prepared and willing to do what you have to do to accomplish the goals that you want.
Would you say it's fair that kind of your passion is what carried you through all those hard times, just being so in love with and caring so much about the ocean and protecting it that kind of carried you through all those rough times?
Yeah, I would say that. And from my perspective now, I think it would probably be fair to say that it wasn't just passion about the ocean. It was actually more a passionate curiosity and a desire to learn about something new and different. And that is now what has kept me going on into things like robotics. And then that led to the ROV thing as well. And it's that desire to keep learning. I'm a curious guy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And you're obviously super, super busy. You're clearly involved in just a ton of stuff. What would you say to those people who maybe think they're too busy to go out and enjoy the outdoors?
When you get up in the morning, instead of sitting at the table reading the newspaper, take your cup of coffee, go sit on the back porch if you can, and watch your flowers and the tremendous number of bees and butterflies and flies and just the insect life around you. I think no matter where you are, there's a tremendous amount of it. You might be swatting them, unfortunately. But they're still pay
They get
attention
too
before
close.
you slap the mosquitoes of what color their legs are or anything. But I think the most important thing is there's a tremendous amount of nature, if you will, all around us. And even if you're out somewhere where it's dry and you think, man, there's hardly anything, look at the rocks and the geology out there. Nature is astonishing if we just take a little bit to appreciate it.
As humans, we really have this tendency to insulate ourselves and think, I live in a house. I have separated myself from nature. And we put up these mental boundaries of, I live in a city. There's no natural spaces around me. When the environment is everywhere. The environment is the city. We have just changed our environment to have it suit our needs, but it's still the environment. We put up all of these mental boundaries between us and nature that don't really exist. And if you take a minute to look around and realize, yep, still bugs here, still birds flying around, that's nature. And as we continue to grow and develop this earth, as our population has exceeded 7 billion and continues growing higher, more and more, that's going to be a really important part of what nature is on this planet.
That's true. It is. And so how we live with the other creatures and how we both make room for them as we grow and as our climate is changing here, then we have to think about how we're building and what we can do to make it easier for us to recover when we get things like hurricanes. When you live in South Carolina, hurricanes are something you think about quite a bit. And so how are we going to recover from those? Because they will happen. And then how do we build smarter and make room for things like the marshes to move as they'll need to, because salt marshes are nurseries for many of the marine species we care about. I love seafood and a lot of that stuff, the action happens right near the coast. And that's where our actions have the biggest impact. And if we're not careful, we're going to mess things up for years to come.
We just have to learn how to coexist.
We do.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. This has been awesome. We really appreciate it.
It's been great to meet you, and hopefully we'll continue this relationship further on into the future.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate this, and I look forward to listening to your podcasts and to doing more in the future, hopefully. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We would love to hear from you. If you want to reach out to us, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact, and shoot us an email.
If you're a teacher and you'd like to use this episode in your classroom, get in touch with us.
We'll provide you with state and national standard tie-ins and additional materials to help you guide a class discussion.
Thanks again for listening, and don't forget to tune in next week.